It's official. Ken Holland is the new general manager of the LA Kings. That and much more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years. Also, one of the co-hosts of Locked On NHL Game Night, a nightly podcast and YouTube show that recaps the night in the NHL, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Well, the LA Kings made it official Wednesday afternoon. Ken Holland is now the new general manager of the Los Angeles Kings. Before I get into my thoughts on this and questions I now have, I did want to read a little bit of the Kings official press release on this news. It'll just be a little bit of it, and here you go. Quote, the LA Kings have named Ken Holland as the 10th general manager in franchise history. Holland will oversee all day-to-day hockey operations for the organization. Kings president Luc Robitaille said on the hire, quote, as we did our due diligence, we identified Ken as the absolute best option and acted decisively to make him our general manager. His track record of success is undeniable, and after our conversations with him, we were clearly convinced he was the right person for us at this time. He has the experience to lead us on the proper path that will help us win now and compete for the Stanley Cup, end quote. Dan Beckerman, president and chief executive officer of AEG, Anschutz Entertainment Group, said, quote, I would like to thank Luc for his continued leadership in steering this process and welcome Ken to the LA Kings. We are excited to be adding such a well-respected and proven general manager to guide our hockey operations at an important time in our organization, end quote. The release went on to list some of Holland's accomplishments: fifth winningest general manager in NHL history, accumulating an all-time record of 1,145 wins, 645 losses, and 272 I don't know, ties maybe were back when he started, ties, overtime or shootout losses. 27 seasons as an NHL GM, 22 years in Detroit, 5 years in Edmonton. His teams made the playoffs 23 of his 27 seasons as a GM. His teams have won 10 division titles, 3 Stanley Cups, and 17 of his 27 teams reached 100 or more points in the regular season. Robitaille and Holland will be made available to the media at an introductory press conference Thursday, 11:30 a.m. Pacific time at the Toyota Sports Performance Center in El Segundo. So I did confirm, by the way, with the LA Kings media relations staff that the press conference will be live streamed on the team's YouTube channel, and it'll be posted afterwards if you can't watch it live, again, on the YouTube channel. All right, so do I like the hire of Ken Holland as the LA Kings general manager? Ultimately, yes. Now, I have said if I was hiring the next Kings GM, I would prefer a younger, perhaps hungrier GM, even a first-time GM with fresh perspectives. I think the organization could use that. That having been said, over the last few days when it became pretty clear that Ken Holland was at least very high on the team's list of potential general managers, I said, and I still believe, you would be very hard-pressed to find another available GM with the kind of accomplishments and track record of a Ken Holland, some of which was mentioned in the press release. He has been there and done that at the highest levels in 2 different places. We talked about the Kings needing a new voice. We know that they now have an extremely accomplished and experienced voice. He understands the job that he's taking over and what is expected, and of course, that is to have playoff success now. I do wonder, and maybe we'll find out, maybe not, at the press conference on Thursday, what Luc Robitaille meant by doing their due diligence in their search for another general manager. I have said that I think the Kings need to make this hire quickly, which they have done. And I do wonder, though, exactly how many people they spoke to. And was this a situation where once Ken Holland said he was interested, that was the end of the search? And then it was just a matter of working out a contract with him? I wonder if we will get an answer to that question. Probably not specifically, but I would be curious to know exactly how many different voices Luc Robitaille did, in fact, talk to. Speaking of Ken Holland's next contract, I have mentioned Elliot Friedman's name on this show the last couple of episodes we've had. I've mentioned in my mind, he is the top hockey insider out there. He works for Sportsnet in Canada. And he said on his latest podcast something very interesting about what he's heard about Ken Holland's contract. Elliot Friedman said he has heard that he is not signing a long-term deal, that his contract will be something short-term to see if he can get the Kings, quote, over the hump, end quote, and into big-time contention for a Stanley Cup. Friedman also alluded to the Kings looking to hire someone newer and younger to take over in the near future, but that it would also be someone that would be on the job soon, and they would have a succession plan in mind from Ken Holland to this next person. It was brought up that it could be something similar to what the St. Louis Blues have going on right now. Their longtime GM, Doug Armstrong, announced in 2024 he'd be stepping down in 2026, and former player and special GM assistant Alexander Steen would be taking over. I actually really like this idea, depending on exactly who the Kings decide to bring in as the next potential GM in waiting. I think this kind of gives the Kings the best of both worlds. You get that incredibly experienced, accomplished GM to take over now, kind of give it his best shot in the short term, but you have a younger, energetic person ready to take the baton if either Holland succeeds or fails on his accomplishment and his goal to get the Kings close to a Stanley Cup. That younger potential GM in waiting could get familiar with the team and then be ready to take over at a later time. One name that Friedman mentioned as the possible GM in waiting is someone I have heard talked about as a hot name for be an ex-general manager. His name is Ryan Martin. He's the assistant general manager of the New York Rangers. He has a connection to Ken Holland. He was the assistant GM in Detroit for 8 seasons. I think that would be a great hire. I like that scenario if, in fact, it does happen. Now, one name that was not brought up by Elliot Friedman is a name that I am curious about, and that is Brad Holland. He is the son of Ken Holland. Now, Brad was, while Ken Holland was the GM in Edmonton, the assistant GM of the Oilers. After Ken Holland wasn't given a contract extension after last season, Brad Holland and the organization, not coincidentally, I'm sure, decided to mutually part ways. Now, I hope this isn't going to be a situation where Ken Holland says, I'll take the job now, and then you can hand it off to my son after a couple of years. I would be pretty sour if that, in fact, was the case. I have no idea if that could be the case. I'm just saying, in his last job, Ken Holland had his son as the assistant GM. Ken Holland leaves. His son leaves. Ken Holland now has a job. Will we see Brad Holland follow in his dad's footsteps to LA? I don't know, but it is something to keep in mind. There is that one kind of red flag that I have with Ken Holland, and maybe there's a reasonable explanation for it, but why after 5 years in Edmonton, with his teams making the playoffs all 5 years and coming within one win of winning the Stanley Cup, was he not given a contract extension the next year? That seems crazy to me. Now, unless he was asking for a huge raise or a really long-term deal, and the Oilers are like, no, we're not going to do that, then I could understand it. But if he is coming to LA, and as Elliot Friedman suggests, he's willing to take a short-term deal, that would seem to suggest that that wasn't the case in Edmonton. Is it possible they mutually parted ways, kind of like the Kings and Rob Blake? Sure, but that situation was way different. Rob Blake was kind of tired of the job. Rob Blake at least had the intestinal fortitude to admit, I'm not getting it done, and I would like to see this team kind of get to the next level. I'm going to step away kind of for the good of the organization and give somebody else a chance at this. And maybe he was kind of burnt out on it too. Whatever the case was, I understood that move. And I understood the Kings not wanting to extend him after the season to kind of see how the playoffs played out, even though Rob Blake had a great past season as GM. So Really, I mean, again, I mentioned this on the show the other day. Could you imagine if the Kings would have made it to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals this year, lost, and then not give Rob Blake an extension if he wanted it? That seems crazy. I don't know what the real story is. Maybe I'm not trying to suggest there's a conspiracy or something, but it is interesting that is the circumstances in which Ken Holland left the Edmonton Oilers. The biggest decision for the Kings' new GM might not have anything to do with the Kings roster. That's next on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Looking for a snack that is both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they are packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you keep filling fuller longer. It's the perfect grab and go snack for busy days, whether you're snacking at your desk or on a road trip, or you just need a quick protein boost. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein providing all 9 essential amino acids, whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids. Wonderful Pistachios is a snack that works as hard as you do. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, now that Ken Holland is in place, the next biggest question to be answered is, what is the status of head coach Jim Hiller? I'll be very curious to see what Ken Holland says. I got to believe that question is going to be answered, or I should say asked on Thursday. Now, I don't expect him to give us a clear answer one way or the other. Oh, yeah, we're looking for a new head coach. Oh, Jim Hiller's definitely coming back. Certainly he has to have a conversation with Jim Hiller before he makes that decision, a conversation with others in the organization. But if Holland answers something like, we're exploring all areas to try and improve the team, that's kind of saying to me that he would be considering a coaching change. Now, I have said I am in favor of a new head coach for the Kings if Ken Holland intends on bringing in an experienced, proven head coach who has playoff success. If he isn't, then no, I am not in favor of coaching change. It makes no sense to me to change coaches and bring in someone different who isn't proven, who isn't experienced, and who hasn't had playoff success. That makes no sense at all. I'd rather just keep Jim Hiller. At least the players know him. He's experienced in the organization. Maybe he learns from his mistakes, but it makes no sense to replace a coach because of his inexperience in the postseason and the mistakes he's made with another younger coach. I've said that before. Now, I know a lot of people think that Jim Hiller committed coaching malpractice last season in the playoffs, and I don't necessarily disagree, but I am respectful of the job that Jim Hiller did last year. 105 points in his first full season as an NHL head coach is pretty incredible. But his coaching mistakes in the playoffs and his sense of a lack of accountability leaves me concerned. So I will say, as a Kings fan, I'm tired of being patient. If the circumstances were somehow different, we wouldn't be talking about this. It's not Jim Hiller's fault the Kings have lost their last 5 playoff appearances in the first round. It's not his fault that they've lost the last 3 in a row. But I think you can be honest and say it probably is at least partially his fault that they did lose what was the toughest of all the playoff losses so far, and 4 straight to the same team. Things need to change. We've seen a GM change. I am not against a head coaching change, again, if we can bring in an experienced head coach that we have a lot of confidence is not going to make those kind of mistakes that Jim Hiller made in the playoffs. There are better coaching options out there, and frankly, it's an easy change to make to affect the team in a possibly big way. And it doesn't matter about the salary cap. It's the easiest thing in the world, whether you're changing a coach because the team's not doing well or because there are questions about the coach, or you're just looking to improve the team. It's always easier to change the coach than the players. Now, the names out there that I hope will not be a next head coach of the LA Kings, should Ken Holland decide to make a change, is a name that I have heard mentioned, and that's Jay Woodcroft. Now, he was one of Holland's hires in Edmonton. He was first the interim head coach. He was an assistant, promoted to interim head coach, and then replaced Dave Tippett the following year as the full-time head coach. He was then replaced by the current head coach of the Edmonton Oilers, Chris Knobloch, who I think I called him Ken the other day. Chris Knobloch. Woodcroft has been interviewing for head coaching vacancies that are currently open. I don't know that he has, well, obviously he hasn't interviewed in LA because there's technically not an opening there yet, but he has interviewed for other jobs. Obviously, he has a relationship with Ken Holland at Edmonton, and he was previously, Jay Woodcroft, he started out his coaching career as a video coach with the Detroit Red Wings. Now, Woodcroft has coached a total of 14 NHL playoff games. Jim Hiller has coached 11. So I understand why Jay Woodcroft's name has been mentioned as a possible replacement for Jim Hiller, but that's not the kind of coach that I think the Kings should be considering if, in fact, they decide to make a coaching change. We talked about on our last show that there were 6 NHL head coaching vacancies. Well, that's now down to 4. The Vancouver Canucks promoted one of their assistants, Adam Foote, to be their next head coach. The Philadelphia Flyers, as expected, are naming Rick Tocchet as their next head coach. Now, Peter Laviolette, who, oh, by the way, has 88 career playoff wins as a head coach, not games, wins, is the most obvious name to me for the LA Kings to hire as their next head coach. And he is currently still available as it stands right now. But again, there are 4 other teams looking for a head coach, and I got to believe he's at the top of a lot of wish lists as well. I mentioned in our last show that Ken Holland made 3 coaching hires in 5 years in Edmonton. The positive of that is that he's not afraid to make changes. The negative is that 2 of the 3 coaches he hired didn't get the job done, and he ended up having to replace them. Now, I do think that Ken Holland's hiring as GM makes it more likely there could be a head coaching change by the Kings, but I also wouldn't be shocked if that doesn't happen either. And as I've said, I would rather keep Jim Hiller if the option is just bringing in another relatively inexperienced coach like a guy like a Jay Woodcroft. I'd rather stick with Jim Hiller. He knows the team. The players seem to like playing for him despite the issues in the playoffs. There's a decent culture, I think, with the LA Kings, and we would, obviously hope he learns from his mistakes in his first time around. Actually, it really is his second time around. I know I sometimes have got caught saying this too. This wasn't Jim Hiller's first time coaching the Kings in the playoffs. He was the interim coach last year when they made the playoffs. This past season was his first year as the full-time head coach in the playoffs. But like I said, he's coached 11 playoff games for the LA Kings. So it's not quite a rookie head coach, as it's a rookie full-time head coach for Jim Hiller. But again, if the Kings can bring in somebody with experience in the playoffs who we don't really have to worry about making those kind of obvious mistakes, if you want to call them that, I think the Kings should do that. So be very interested to see what Ken Holland has to say about that coming up on Thursday, and ultimately what he decides to do. As I mentioned, though, the clock is ticking on a guy like a Peter Laviolette, who, again, I think is the kind of the obvious choice. What roster moves will Ken Holland be looking to make? We will touch on that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's in-game for a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in on the game before tip-off and during the action. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Which players are showing up in the biggest moments? How could tracking their trends help you build your next big bet? What would it look like to combine a live prop mid-game based on how the action unfolds? If you've got a read on who's heating up, why not back it up with a same-game parlay? How could a $200 bonus in bets add to the excitement if your first $5 bet wins? New to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. So what will new Kings GM Ken Holland be able to do to shape the roster for next season? We've talked about it before. The Kings roster is pretty much set. There's not a lot of things he's going to need to do coming in. But of course, there's always the possibility of making a trade. There's always the possibility of trying to sign one of the big free agents out there. Mitch Marner obviously is at the top of the list. He's going to be commanding a lot of money, maybe a Brock Besser, who is an upgrade, right, at a position that the Kings may be in need of, a right-handed shot, a right winger. The biggest decision, though, that Ken Holland will have to make before considering any other outside trades is, does he want to re-sign the Kings' biggest unrestricted free agent, and that is defenseman Vladislav Gavrikov. Gabby had a tremendous season last year. He's been a great player in all respects for the Kings. Good teammate, works hard, versatile, can play on both sides of your first or your second pairing, and is just a very capable contributor no matter where he plays in the lineup. He is a valuable player, and he's going to be highly sought after if the Kings decide they don't want to sign him. He's arguably the biggest unrestricted free agent defenseman that is available. Aaron Ekblad is another one who's out there as well, who's going to get a lot of interest. As for Vladislav Gavrikov, he was clearly one of the Kings' most important players last year. He would absolutely be in the discussion as the most valuable player for the LA Kings last season. The price to re-sign him is going to be pretty high. He's coming off a 2-year deal where he was paid $5.8 million per season. He's going to be looking for a longer-term deal, and he's going to be looking for more money per season than his last contract for sure. Again, if the Kings don't give it to him, I definitely somebody else is going to. I think Gavrikov is going to be looking around $7 to $8 million a season. Now, Rob Blake had seemed pretty confident when he was still on the job and was asked about Gavrikov as far as the Kings wanting to and being able to re-sign Gavrikov, but Rob Blake is obviously now out of the picture. New GM comes in, might feel differently. Will Ken Holland maybe save the money that he could spend on Vladislav Gavrikov and try and upgrade the Kings roster elsewhere, and then maybe look for a cheaper option on the back end to supplement the defensive core? Certainly one of the questions that we're looking to get asked. I think it would make a lot of sense, though, to re-sign Gavrikov for a number of reasons. Obviously, he's a key member of the team now and in the near future. I think it would go over really well in the room to re-sign a player who's earned a big contract with the Kings. And, you know, that certainly has a positive impact, I think, on the other players, that you get rewarded for doing good things with the team that you're playing for. There was a lot of talk in the exit meetings about how well this group gets along and the culture, and, you know, keeping Gavrikov is something that tries to keep that intact. And again, I think Gavrikov really likes playing here, and I think he's done a good job here. Those are sometimes the kind of guys you want to reward, but again, it all depends on the numbers and the years, and if Ken Holland feels like that is a contract that he wants to sign long-term, and of course, what other offers he gets as well. Not as big of a question as Gavrikov is, what do the Kings do with Tanner Jeannot and Andrei Kuzmenko, the other two unrestricted free agents that are on the roster, but those questions will need answers as well. But the re-signing of Gavrikov or not will likely set the tone for what the Kings and new GM Ken Holland will do this offseason. A couple other quick Kings notes I wanted to pass along, checking in on the players in the Kings organization. They're at the World Championships over in Sweden and Denmark. Ontario Reign forward Martin Chromiak scored his first goal of the tournament. He did have a goal in a shootout as well, but scored the first goal of the game in Slovakia's 2-1 over France earlier in the day. The USA beat Norway 6-5. Kings goalie prospect Hampus Lukinski did not dress as the team's third goaltender for this one. Would be nice if they could have a situation where maybe they've qualified for the medal round and they're playing in a game that doesn't mean anything, and he could at least dress as the backup. But as I've said, the experience he is getting over there, just hanging out, working out with these NHL players and these NHL goalies like Joey Decord and Jeremy Swayman, great experience for Hampton Slukinski regardless. Checking junior hockey OHL championships, Kings prospect Jared Woolley and the London Knights took a 3-1 series lead against the Oshawa Generals thanks to a decisive 6-2 victory in game number 5, or actually game number 4. Is it game 4 or game 5? Anyway, yeah, it's 3-1. The series lead is 3-1. Sorry. Woolley was a 6th-round pick of the Kings in 2024. He was named the number 3 star of the game in the latest win over Oshawa. 6'5", 200-pound defenseman, has 2 goals and 7 assists. He had an assist in the win last night. 9 points in 15 playoff games this postseason. And London, one win away from winning the OHL championship. All right, for you everydayers, those of you that listen to watch Locked On Kings every day, coming up on our next show, full reaction to what Luc Robitaille and Ken Holland have to say at Ken Holland's introductory press conference as the Kings' new general manager coming up on Thursday. If you want to contact the show, you can send us an email, lockedoneddie@gmail.com. Always feel free to leave your comments if you're watching on YouTube in the comments section. Stay interactive with the show on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you as always for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you next time. And as always, go Kings, go.